Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that sounds both delicious and deeply impractical. Butter sculptures in the high mountains of Tibet. Imagine it, you're standing in a monastery courtyard just as the horizon turns pale blue, the cold biting your nose, the kind of chill that makes your breath puff out like little ghosts. Around you, monks shuffle with bowls and buckets of yak butter, thick and waxy, smelling faintly sour but oddly comforting. They're preparing to sculpt it into God's animals and fantastical creatures. And yes, it's butter, the stuff you'd normally slap on toast. You probably won't survive this if you try to lick one of these statues, though the monks would definitely frown and also your tongue would stick. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Drop it in the comments. Are you curled up at midnight in New York or drifting off after lunch in Singapore? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The courtyard is hushed, except for the faint clatter of metal ladles against stone bowls. You trudge closer, watching a monk's hands plunge into a mound of pale butter that glistens in the half-light. He kneads it like dough, softening it against the brutal cold of the Tibetan plateau. Yak butter doesn't behave like the salted stick in your fridge. Up here at this altitude, it hardens almost like clay when chilled, holding shape long enough to be molded into elaborate designs. That's your first real fact of the night. Butter in Tibet isn't just food, it's fuel for lamps offerings and even artwork that refuses to last beyond sunrise. As the sky lightens, you notice how the monks move quickly. There's a reason within hours as the sun climbs and the air warms, every sculpture will melt, collapse and vanish. Historians still argue whether this was always the intended destiny of the ritual, or if it simply became accepted over centuries. Either way, the impermanence is the point, or at least that's one interpretation. The butter is stiff, but not lifeless. One monk pats a block into a rough square, then pinches edges with thumb and forefinger until something like petals form. Another is already shaping what looks like the curve of a deity's headdress. The air smells faintly smoky from butter lamps flickering along the temple walls. If you've ever burned a candle too long and gotten that odd greasy scent, multiply it by 100, and you're close. The sun isn't up yet, but the anticipation is. In the shadows, you catch yourself thinking of modern ice sculptors in winter carnivals, except these monks don't have chainsaws, neon lights, or drunk tourists taking selfies. Just butter bare hands and patience. You notice small details. A child monk no older than 10 sneaks a fingertip of butter into his mouth when no one is looking. His face crumples instantly. Joke number 1 turns out raw yak butter tastes more like rancid gym socks than a creamy croissant topping. It's more fuel than flavor, something villagers stir into tea to fight the cold. A gust of wind slips across the courtyard, rattling prayer flags overhead. The flags are tattered, printed with mantras that blur together after years of weather. They add a kind of soundtrack, a fluttering whisper that almost harmonizes with the low chants coming from inside the temple. You shift your weight on the stone floor, trying to feel what the monks might feel, the mix of focused devotion and awareness that this creation is already half dissolved by time itself. And yet the sculptures begin to rise. First, small lotus blossoms, wheels of Dharma symbols that the monks can craft with practiced speed. Then larger faces, torsos, animals emerging from the butter's pale flesh. One sculpture looks like a horse rearing up, another like a fierce guardian with bulging eyes and curling hair. Here's your quirky tidbit: in the coldest months, some monasteries actually stored big piles of butter outside covered in yak hides as a kind of freezer system. When festival season arrived, they carved directly from these frozen reserves like blocks of marble. It wasn't Michelangelo's David, but it had the same sense of chiseling away to find form hidden inside matter. You're mesmerized. Even though you know the science, the fat content stiffens in cold, pigments from crushed minerals or flowers can color the butter, hand heat softens edges, you still feel there's something mystical about it. Maybe because each piece, however divine, has an expiration date that isn't negotiable. As the eastern sky brightens, you feel the stakes rise. Every stroke of the sculptor's hand, every curve pressed into place, is racing against a clock no one can see, but everyone knows. It's a soft ticking not of gears, but of warmth. The sculptures aren't frozen in perfection. They're breathing their last before they're even alive. And you standing there feel oddly protective, like if you could just shade them, shield them from the sun, they'd endure. But they won't. That's the strange ache of it, beauty destined to vanish. You look around one last time before the sun breaks the horizon. The butter glows faintly in the blue light like moonlit marble. For a fleeting moment it feels eternal, as if these deities could outlast you, outlast the monks, outlast centuries. But you know better. And just as the first golden ray slices the peaks in the distance, you sense what the monks already accept. The dawn will melt everything. That's where the ritual begins and where it ends. You stay in the courtyard a little longer watching as the monks continue their sculpting, and soon your attention drifts toward the raw ingredient itself, the yak butter. It's not exactly the glamorous star you'd expect to find in a sacred ritual, but without it, none of this art would exist. You picture the whole journey starting in a smoky kitchen hut, far away in some mountain village, where a Tibetan woman bends over a wooden churn. She's been up since dawn, milking a shaggy yak, her hands red from the cold steam rising from the animal's breath like a dragon. She pours the milk into a tall churn made of wood and leather. With rhythmic strokes, she drives a plunger up and down, while the younger children stir a pot of butter tea on the stove. The air smells sharp, part dairy, part smoke, part wool. After long minutes, sometimes an hour, the milk separates pale lumps, clumping together from the liquid. She gathers them, rinses, presses them tight until at last she has butter. Thick, yellow-white, greasy in a way that promises both calories and survival. Here's your historical fact of the night in Tibet. Yak butter wasn't just food, it was wealth, fuel medicine, and art material. Entire trade routes wound through the mountains carrying sacks of it packed into yak hide bags. Monasteries collected butter as tax or donation from villagers hoarding it like gold. Now imagine you're that villager trudging up to the monastery, a sack of butter on your back. You've got frost clinging to your eyebrows, your boots stiff with ice, but you keep going because this delivery isn't optional. At the gates, the monks smile faintly, take the butter and bow. Your contribution will flicker as lamplight before statues of the Buddha or be molded into a god's serene smile. Not bad for something you scraped out of a churn that morning. The irony, of course, is that butter also feeds you. Stirred into salty tea, it keeps your lips from cracking, your stomach from gnawing at itself. A spoonful in broth can mean the difference between fainting on a snowy path and trudging one more mile. Which brings us to our quirky tidbit. Some travelers in the 19th century swore that Tibetan butter tea tasted like someone had boiled gym socks in salt water and added cream. But the locals loved it, and they still do. Taste buds are cultural soldiers. They fight for their own homeland. Back in the monastery courtyard, you realize how much butter flows through every corner of Tibetan life. Butter lamps line the altars, small flames flickering like stars against the dark wood. The smoke clings to the statues above, leaving them shiny and blackened, almost as if they've been painted with shadows. The monks dip wicks into the bowls, relight them with a casualness that makes you think they've been doing this every day of their lives, which of course they have. Historians still argue whether butter was used so extensively because it was sacred from the start, or whether practicality and abundance of milk and fat turned it into a sacred substance over time. Was it holiness first, or convenience elevated into holiness? The debate hums like a soft undercurrent beneath every sculpture. You crouch beside a small figure taking shape, a butter lotus no larger than your hand. Its petals are impossibly thin, glowing faintly in the dawn light. A monk explains softly that the lotus represents purity rising unstained from muddy waters. You nod, pretending you fully understand, though part of you can't help but think, yes, but it's still butter. Joke number 1. Tonight imagine trying to butter your toast with a symbol of cosmic enlightenment. Still you're drawn in. The monks don't see butter as greasy dairy. They see it as something that can hold prayers. The act of molding is itself meditation, a conversation between fingers and spirit. You wonder if that's why they work so quickly and so calmly, never flustered even though the sun creeps higher by the minute. The courtyard grows busier. More monks arrive carrying bundles of pigments red from cinnabar blue, from ground lapis lazuli green, from malachite. They'll mix these powders into the butter, tinting it with colors more brilliant than any cloth or paint the villagers could afford. But for now, the raw butter, pale and trembling in the cold, is the star. Another gust of wind rattles the prayer flags and you pull your robe tighter, realizing you've been standing there long enough for your toes to go numb. You glance at the sculptures again, noticing how fingerprints dimple their surfaces. Each impression is both imperfect and intimate, like seeing the artist's breath frozen into the work. You can almost feel those hands pressing, pinching, smoothing, leaving behind little ridges that say, "Yes, I was here. I shaped this moment." And then you think about your own kitchen back home. Butter there means popcorn pancakes or maybe a midnight grilled cheese. Here it's gods and lanterns, art and prayer. Same fat, same slippery texture, but a different destiny entirely. You wonder if that's the lesson hiding beneath the surface, that meaning comes not from the substance itself, but from how people choose to use it. A bell rings faintly from inside the temple. The monks pause, press their palms together, then return to work with even greater focus. The butter in their bowls gleams, waiting to be transformed. And you still shivering realize you're watching more than just a ritual, you're watching survival turned into beauty. The courtyard deepens in sound as the temple bell echoes, and you notice how the monks lean into their work, as though every stroke of their fingers must be finished before that golden rim of sun crests over the jagged mountains. The butter itself, so pale and unassuming in the bowls, begins to transform into beings that feel alive. You shift closer, your steps echoing on stone, until you're almost nose to nose with a butter deity whose eyes bulge wide, fierce yet oddly endearing. It's in this moment that the air thickens with drama. You're no longer just watching butter being shaped. You're witnessing a kind of silent race against inevitability. The monks sculpt with the focus of surgeons, every detail pressed quickly yet deliberately, as though they know they're building something doomed. And that's where the ritual's heartbeat lies, in the tension between effort and futility. The butter is mixed with colored powders now. You see one monk scoop a lump, knead it with streaks of lapis blue until it glows like frozen sky. Another stirs in bright red, staining his palms like he's handled raw berries. When they spread the colors across a statue's face, the figure seems to look back at you, its butter skin both fragile and eternal. Here's your grounded historical fact. These butter sculptures became central to the Monlam, or Great Prayer Festival, which began in Lhasa around the 15th century. Thousands of monks would gather during the first lunar month, filling the streets with chanting butter lamps and these fleeting works of art. The sculptures weren't mere decorations, they embodied offerings to deities, prayers for prosperity, and symbols of impermanence. You glance at a younger monk, rolling butter into thin coils, almost like pasta, then layering them into the curling mane of a butter lion. His tongue pokes from the corner of his mouth as he concentrates. It's a funny sight, you can't help but imagine him as a contestant on one of those frantic cooking shows. Joke number 1 tonight, chopped monastery edition. Your secret ingredient is 3 pounds of yak butter, and you have 6 hours before it melts. As night fades into the pale grey of early morning, you realize this isn't just art, it's performance. Inside the temple walls, monks chant, their low voices resonating through the wood and stone. The sound drapes itself over the courtyard, blending with the flutter of prayer flags. You close your eyes for a moment and let it wash through you, the vibrations soft in your chest like distant thunder. When you open them again, the sculptures seem almost to pulse in rhythm. The atmosphere tightens further as older monks circulate, inspecting the progress. They don't shout or correct, but a single raised eyebrow can send a young sculptor back to reshaping a deity's hand. There's pressure here, unspoken but undeniable. This is sacred, and mistakes, though inevitable, must be hidden before the public sees. Then comes the quirky tidbit. Travelers once described how the monks would dip their fingers in cold water, even snow between shaping strokes, to keep the butter from softening too quickly under their body heat. Imagine kneading a lump of butter with numb fingers until it becomes a snarling dragon's head. You drop it in 10 seconds flat, but these monks, they keep sculpting fingers red and raw yet steady. Historians still argue whether the earliest butter sculptures were originally meant to be grand and colourful, or if the tradition began humbly, just small shapes, symbols, or simple offerings on altars. Some records suggest elaborate displays only came centuries later, once monasteries competed for prestige during the festival. Others argue that the artistry was always there, just less documented. The courtyard's energy swells as the figures grow taller. Two monks work together on a towering deity whose crown bristles with spikes. They climb small wooden stools, pressing lumps into place, smoothing the butter with flat stones dipped in icy water. You watch them wobble a little, laugh briefly, then return to their solemn focus. You wonder how many of these statues have collapsed mid-ritual, slipping apart in some sudden, embarrassing heap. Joke number 2. Nothing like your god of compassion turning into a greasy puddle while everyone's watching. As the first sunlight slides over the mountain ridges, you feel the stakes crest. Every chant inside grows louder, every hand outside moves faster. The butter, coloured now in reds, greens, blues and whites, catches the light and glows strangely warm, though you know warmth is its enemy. For a moment you think you can see breath steaming from the sculptures, though it's only the chill air playing tricks. The monks don't pause. Sweat beads their brows despite the cold, a strange sight. You'd think the chill would freeze them solid, but their exertion pushes heat out anyway. Their robes darken at the armpits, but they don't care. They know what you're realizing. This is the climax. The butter gods, the mythic beasts, the lotus blossoms, all of them exist most vividly in this fragile moment between dark and dawn. And then it hits you almost like a whisper. These sculptures are already melting. Not visibly, not yet, but the process has begun. The sun has risen, the air is warming, and the countdown has started. You watch one monk press a final petal onto a lotus, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from exhaustion. He knows it won't last. He also knows it doesn't have to. For you, though, there's a pang. It feels unfair watching beauty destined for erasure. You wonder if the monks ever feel that pang too, or if years of practice have trained them to smile at it, to let go with grace. The chants thunder louder, rising with the light, until the whole courtyard feels like it's vibrating. You press your palms together, almost unconsciously, drawn into the gravity of it. And in that moment, you realize the high drama here isn't about survival or spectacle. It's about the delicate dance of holding on, then releasing. The sunlight spills more fully into the courtyard, painting the butter figures with a glow that's both divine and fatal. You stand there, shoulders hunched against the cold, as the monks finish their frantic work. And now comes the shift, not in the sculptures but in the people. When the gates open, villagers stream in their breath, puffing like white smoke. Pilgrims, merchants, children clutching their mothers' robes, travelers weary from the passes, all push gently forward to see the butter gods before they melt. There's a murmur of awe, like the low hum of bees in a summer meadow. Everyone knows these figures are temporary, yet for this brief span of hours they are as real as stone. The first reaction is always wonder. A woman gasps softly at the curling mane of a butter lion. A child points, laughing at the exaggerated, bulging eyes of a guardian deity. You hear a young man whisper that the blue pigment on a lotus looks brighter than any flower he's seen in the valley. It's a shared astonishment, a communal gasp at beauty wrung out of fat and frost. But there's another layer too. Among the older villagers' faces weathered and lined like leather, you see quiet reverence. They bow, murmuring prayers, pressing palms together. For them this is more than spectacle, it's an offering, a fleeting ladder between earth and heaven. and for a moment even you feel it, that tug towards something bigger than yourself, even if it's wrapped in butter. Here's your grounded historical fact: these butter sculptures weren't merely pretty decorations. During the Great Prayer Festival in Lhasa, they lined streets and temple courtyards, part of vast rituals meant to secure blessings for the entire region. Entire communities contributed, farmers donating butter, artisans shaping designs, pilgrims carrying prayers into the city. The art was communal, not individual, reflecting a culture where impermanence itself was woven into daily life. And yet reactions varied. That's where it gets interesting. Some villagers reportedly grumbled, "Why waste good butter on gods when we could eat it?" Survival in Tibet wasn't easy after all. And so we get our quirky tidbit. At least one European traveller noted how a few cheeky children waited for the festival to end, then scooped up melted butter from the ground to eat like candy. He claimed they did it with glee, but you can almost hear the monks sighing in dismay. Historians still argue whether these festivals were truly embraced by all, or if some resented the extravagance in times of famine. Did the sculptures inspire devotion or stir quiet bitterness? The debate lingers, just like the smell of butter smoke on temple walls. You continue wandering among the crowd. The figures loom above, taller than you'd expect from something so fragile. Dragons twist in mid-flight wings fanned with delicate ridges. Deities sit serenely, their hands frozen in mudras, faces glowing with pigments. You can almost hear whispers ripple through the crowd as each new group arrives. It feels like a carnival and a pilgrimage at once. Merchants hawk roasted barley cakes nearby, the smell mixing bizarrely with the fatty tang of butter. Kids dart through legs playing hide and seek around sacred sculptures. A group of nomads kneel on the ground, foreheads pressed to the stone, prostrating themselves in front of a butter deity, as if the figure might see them before it vanishes. And then the murmur shifts. The sun climbs higher, and already the edges of one sculpture begin to sag. A wing droops on a butterbird, a tiny crack creeps across a lotus petal. Someone in the crowd points, and there's a ripple of laughter, soft but undeniable. Beauty is sliding into absurdity, and everyone sees it. Joke number one tonight: nothing like a divine guardian slowly turning into a stick of margarine before your eyes. The monks don't flinch. They keep chanting, hands folded as if the melting is as sacred as the creation. You realize that's part of the ritual acceptance. The crowd, though, feels both fascination and disappointment. You overhear one man mutter, "We walked 3 days for this, and it lasts only hours," but beside him a woman hushes him, saying, "That's the teaching, you can't hold it." You pause, thinking about how modern life worships permanence: photos stored in the cloud buildings of steel, even plastic toys that'll outlast oceans. And here in this courtyard, the lesson is the opposite: beauty can exist without lasting. The reactions swirl: children giggling, pilgrims praying, merchants shrugging. And in that swirl you realize this practice doesn't just show impermanence, it tests how each person faces it. Some laugh, some sigh, some bow deeper. It's a mirror more than a sculpture. The quirky part: butter festivals sometimes became competitive. Monasteries would try to outdo each other, crafting more elaborate, more colorful displays. Villagers gossiped about which temple had the best butter gods that year. You can almost imagine the rivalry. Our dragon had 30 teeth, yours had only 20. Joke number two: nothing like a religious ceremony doubling as a neighborhood bake-off, but with butter instead of pies. The debate among historians: was it pure devotion or also social spectacle? Feels alive in the faces around you. And maybe that's the real magic. Not the butter itself, but the way people respond to it, layer after layer of meaning poured onto melting fat. By midday, the courtyard is full. The air grows warmer, and you sense the tide turning. Soon, sagging wings will collapse, serene faces will slump, petals will fold into greasy puddles. But for now, the crowd clings to this fragile moment, holding their breaths as beauty trembles on the edge of vanishing. The sun is higher now, warming the stones beneath your feet. Around you, the butter figures are beginning to soften at the edges, colors bleeding, shapes sagging. Yet rather than despair, you find yourself oddly calm, lulled into the rhythm of acceptance that seems to permeate the courtyard. The monks knew this would happen, the villagers knew it too, but in the act of watching beauty dissolve lessons, begin to surface lessons that feel as sticky and rich as the butter itself. You look at the dragon sculpture first. Hours ago its wings stretched fierce and proud, each feather traced in green and blue. Now the tips droop, sliding downward in glossy streaks. A child tugs his mother's sleeve and whispers, "It's crying." The mother smiles softly, nodding. That's one of the lessons, isn't it? To see loss not as destruction but as a form of expression. Here's your grounded historical fact: impermanence, the Buddhist concept that all things arise, change and pass away, was at the heart of these butter rituals. Monks emphasized that nothing, not even gods carved from devotion, could escape time. To witness that truth in physical form was part of the teaching. Yet there's also something strangely celebratory in the collapse. As petals fold inward and beasts sag into unrecognizable lumps, the crowd doesn't wail. Some laugh, some sigh, but many bow again, accepting that their prayers have been carried through the moment of beauty itself. It's not about the statue's survival, it's about its fleeting presence. And here comes your quirky tidbit. Some monks reportedly reused the melted butter afterward, not for eating. That ship had sailed, it smelled far too rancid, but to keep lamps burning in the temples. In a way, the gods melted into light, shining on into the night as liquid offerings. Historians still argue whether villagers truly grasped this philosophical lesson, or if it was mainly monks and elites who wrapped impermanence in ritual language. Was it profound spirituality, or simply a practical festival that became over-interpreted later? The truth probably lies somewhere in between. You move closer to a sculpture of a deity once regal now, with a face sagging like wax. It's a little comical if you're honest. Joke number 1 tonight: nothing humbles a god faster than gravity and sunshine. And yet watching it melt feels strangely freeing. You think about your own life, the photos you cling to, the souvenirs gathering dust, the files you've backed up 3 times just in case. Maybe all of it is butter, too softening with time, whether you want it to or not. You glance at the villagers again. For them, the butter festival isn't only about gods or teachings, it's also memory. Children will recall laughing at the melting faces. Pilgrims will remember the chanting vibrations in their bones. Merchants will talk about the crowds that swelled the bread they sold, the stories they traded. The sculptures vanish, but the experiences linger. That's another lesson hiding here. Memory is the true sculpture, carved not from butter but from time itself. Each person carries away their own version, reshaped and retold. You pause to inhale. The air is thick, now greasy, a mixture of sun-warmed butter and smoke from nearby lamps. It's not pleasant, like standing too close to a fast food fryer in July, but it's part of the sensory tapestry. The smell lingers in your hair, your clothes, and you realize that even scents can become lessons. Not everything sweet endures. Sometimes the sacred reeks a little. Joke number 2. Imagine the world's most holy art exhibit doubling as the worst diet temptation ever. Do not lick the statues, even if they smell like popcorn. The monks remain steady, still chanting. Some sit cross-legged, eyes half closed, breathing evenly as if nothing has changed, and maybe nothing has. For them, the collapse was built into the creation. The sculpture was finished not when it stood tall, but when it fell. You crouch by a puddle forming at the base of a once proud lion. The colors swirl faintly in the greasy liquid, green streaks, red blotches, blue smudges. It looks almost like an oil painting spilled across the stone. And you realize, oddly enough, that beauty hasn't vanished, it's only shifted form. The lion is still here, just no longer recognizable. That's when the broader value sinks in. What the monks teach with butter, you can carry into anything: work, relationships, ambitions. None of it lasts, not exactly. But impermanence doesn't erase meaning, it defines it. The quirky part. In some remote areas, butter sculpting extended into smaller household rituals, with families shaping simple flowers or symbols during festivals. They didn't have pigments or grand courtyards, but the message remained: even humble beauty deserves to be cherished while it lasts. Historians still debate how far back these practices go. Was it a continuation of earlier Himalayan traditions, or a uniquely Tibetan expression that crystallized during the 15th century? The record is blurry like butter softening in the sun, but maybe the uncertainty itself is fitting history too, melts at the edges, leaving only impressions behind. By now, the courtyard is a theatre of collapse. Figures slump into puddles, colours drip, details blur. Yet the lesson is clear: it was never about preservation, but about presence. And somehow, knowing that makes you breathe easier, like a weight has lifted. You step back, letting the crowd surge forward, and carry with you the echo of the butter gods, not in their fragile forms, but in the quiet wisdom they left behind. By early afternoon, the courtyard has become a strange mix of devotion and comedy. Butter beasts lean sideways like drunks after a festival, while lotus petals curl into greasy spirals on the ground. Yet the crowd lingers, because what's unfolding isn't just art, it's theatre, and everyone is part of it. You hear laughter ripple when a butter dragon's snout finally slips off and plops to the stone with a soft thud. A group of children squeal with delight, rushing forward before a monk sternly waves them back. Adults shake their heads, some embarrassed by the giggles, others chuckling quietly themselves. Beauty collapsing into absurdity is irresistible, and no one can help but notice it. That's when you learn about the competitive spirit beneath the surface. This isn't just a single monastery's ritual. Across Tibet, rival temples staged butter sculpting displays during the Great Prayer Festival. Each tried to outdo the others with more elaborate, more colorful, more daring sculptures. Think of it as an ancient art contest, except instead of judges with clipboards, you had crowds of pilgrims murmuring, "The Jokang's lion looked better than Drapung's this year." Here's your grounded historical fact. Records describe the Lhasa Butter Lamp Festival, or Chunga Chwepa, where monks unveiled towering butter tableaux, sometimes as tall as buildings, filling entire streets with glowing sculptures. The rivalry between monasteries like Sera Drapung and Ganden became legendary, and the competition itself became part of the ritual. Now for your quirky tidbit. Some accounts say monks spiced things up by sculpting scenes of daily life, not just deities. Butter fishermen hauling nets, butter yaks trudging uphill, even butter merchants squabbling. Imagine walking into a courtyard expecting gods and instead seeing a buttery reenactment of your neighbour arguing over barley prices. So that's devotion with a wink. Historians still argue whether these competitions diluted the spiritual meaning of the ritual, or whether they deepened community involvement by drawing bigger crowds. Was it spectacle overshadowing substance, or substance strengthened by spectacle? Like the butter itself, the truth probably melted into a mix of both. The monks in your courtyard seem to know the crowd is watching closely. Their sculptures, though sagging, still carry dignity. A guardian deity's eyes droop unevenly, yet the figure somehow looks fiercer in its distortion. A bird's wings slump, but the colors shimmer as they slide. The imperfection feels intentional, like the monks are reminding you that flaw and beauty can live side by side. Meanwhile, pilgrims whisper their judgments. The lotus is finer this year, or last year's lion looked stronger. You can't help but grin. Joke number one tonight is basically the world's oldest Yelp review system, except instead of rating a burger joint, they're critiquing gods sculpted in dairy. The sun beats harder now, and monks begin lighting more butter lamps as if to honor what's slipping away. The smoke grows thicker, curling upward, staining the wooden beams black. You cough softly, then glance at the villagers. None seem to mind. For them, this smell is woven into memory, an annual perfume of devotion. Children tug at sleeves, asking if they can come back next year, if the sculptures will look the same, if the gods will smile again. Parents reassure them, though everyone knows the answer, they'll return, but never the same. Every year, the butter teaches its lesson differently. You notice how the mood in the crowd has shifted from awe to curiosity, then to playful critique, and finally to reflection. People begin to drift away, carrying the memory of what they've seen. Some buy food from vendors, others head toward the temple for more prayers, but everyone leaves with an impression, however fleeting. And isn't that the point? These competitions, this ritual theatre, carved meaning, not just into butter, but into people. The winners weren't the monasteries with the best sculptures, but the communities who carried the stories forward year after year. Joke number 2. Imagine being the monk whose sculpture collapses fastest. Sorry, Brother Tenzin, looks like your butter Buddha pulled a faceplant this year. Even holy art has bloopers, and maybe that's part of its charm. Historians debate endlessly, was this art, religion, politics, or entertainment? And as you stand there surrounded by melting gods and murmuring villagers, you realize it doesn't have to be just one. It was all of it at once. A reminder that life itself is a festival where nothing stays upright for long, but everything matters while it lasts. By late afternoon, the courtyard is slick with puddles, the sculptures reduced to abstract blobs. The monks continue chanting unfazed. The crowd thins, drifting into alleys lit by lanterns, ready for the next phase of celebration. You take one last look at the sagging figures, half gods, half puddles, and smile. Impermanence never looked so theatrical. The crowd thins further, yet you stay. You're drawn to what remains half-formed, half-collapsed creatures clinging stubbornly to shape. A butter lion still crouches near the corner, its mane drooping in greasy ribbons. A dragon's head leans sideways, one eye sliding toward its chin like it's just heard a joke it didn't understand. And scattered around them are birds, serpents, and hybrid beasts myth made edible. The monks don't pause to mourn the sagging forms. They move calmly, reshaping small details where possible, as if reminding the sculptures to hold their dignity a little longer. You crouch down to look closely at one of the birds. Its wings were once sharp and layered, each feather pinched thin by patient fingers. Now the feathers slump, dripping at the edges. But still in that sagging mess you recognize the outline of flight. It's as if even in collapse, the bird refuses to forget what it was meant to be. Here's your grounded historical fact. Many butter sculptures deliberately depicted animals, lions, elephants, deer, and especially mythical creatures like dragons and Garudas. So these weren't random choices. Each animal carried symbolic weight: lions for strength, deer for compassion, birds for spiritual flight. Even the fantastical ones like snow lions and dragons embodied cosmic forces in Tibetan Buddhist lore. And then there's your quirky tidbit. Some travelers swore they once saw butter monkeys with exaggerated grins sculpted to remind onlookers of human folly. Butter animals weren't always solemn, they could poke fun too. Which is both hilarious and slightly tragic, because within hours those grinning monkeys melted into puddles, their humor swallowed by the sun. Historians still argue whether the animal figures were meant primarily as teaching tools or if they were crowd pleasers designed to entertain pilgrims. Was the butter dragon a meditation on impermanence, or just a really good way to get kids interested in attending the truth, like the sculptures probably straddled both realms? You stroll to another figure, a butter yak, horns curling like ivory, its stance solid and proud. Something about it tugs at you, perhaps because you know yaks gave the butter itself. The animal is both the source and the sculpture, a circle of offering that feels oddly poetic. Joke number 1 tonight. Imagine a yak wandering into the courtyard, staring at its buttery twin and thinking, really, that's what you did with my milk? The chanting inside the temple rises again, a slow pulse that makes the sculptures seem alive, even as they dissolve. You close your eyes listening, and when you open them, the butter animals look less like lumps and more like spirits, halfway between worlds. Maybe that's the magic, seeing divinity not in perfection but in transition. The children in the crowd are especially drawn to the beasts. One boy tugs at his father's sleeve, insisting that the lion looks just like the one in his dream. A girl giggles at the dragon's sagging face, then bows solemnly as her mother presses her head down. For them, these animals are both playground and prayer. A monk nearby begins explaining to a group of pilgrims how each creature represents qualities they should embody. The lion's courage, the bird's freedom, the dragon's fierce wisdom. His voice is calm, but his hands gesture toward the melting forms, emphasizing the lesson even virtues are impermanent unless tended with care. You nod to yourself, wisdom disguised as zoology wrapped in butter. The smell grows heavier, sweet and rancid at once, like overcooked popcorn left too long on the stove. It clings to the air, but no one leaves. The pilgrims want to see the moment the animals finally vanish. The tension is strange, waiting not for a performance to begin, but for it to end. You chuckle quietly when you notice two young monks pretending to spar with sticks imitating the butter dragon and lion. Their older mentor catches them, gives a stern glare, then cracks the faintest smile before turning away. Joke number 2. Even monks can't resist a little Godzilla versus Lion King when surrounded by butter monsters. The afternoon wears on. The animals lose form, yet their symbolism lingers. The lion may slump, but strength still radiates in memory. The dragon may sag, but its fiery reputation burns in the mind. The yak may puddle, but its role as life-giver endures in every cup of tea. Historians debate whether these butter animals were also a nod to older pre-Buddhist traditions in Tibet, where animism and shamanic practices revered beasts as guardians and spirits. Did the butter dragon descend from local sky deities later folded into Buddhism? Or was it imported imagery sculpted into local fat? The arguments keep scholars busy, but for you, the debate feels irrelevant in this courtyard. What matters is that the animals still roar, still fly, still graze, at least in imagination. By the time the sun dips westward, the animals are half puddles, their faces sliding, wings melting, horns drooping. Yet you find yourself smiling. The butter beasts have taught you more in their collapse than in their perfection. You take one last look at the dragon, crooked and half dissolved, and feel a flicker of respect, not for what it was, but for how it vanished slowly, proudly, leaving behind memory, laughter, and a greasy sheen of wonder. Evening creeps across the city, and with it comes a transformation that feels almost theatrical. Where the sun once melted everything, now darkness begins to cradle what's left. Monks and laypeople shuffle through the streets carrying long poles tipped with lanterns. The light isn't white and sterile, it's a trembling gold made softer by the butter lamps already burning in windows, shrines and courtyards. You wander into an alley and suddenly the whole place feels alive. Every doorway flickers, every window glows. The air smells like smoke and warm fat, with a hint of incense drifting from temple thresholds. You realize that the city itself has become a sculpture, not carved in butter but carved in light. Here's your grounded historical fact. During the Lhasa Butter Lamp Festival, thousands of lamps were lit throughout the city, illuminating the streets for processions and pilgrimages. The festival was as much about light as it was about sculpture, symbolizing wisdom, burning away ignorance. Now for your quirky tidbit, some locals believe butter lamps could also ward off mischievous spirits who crept through alleys at night. So, in addition to pleasing deities, you were also basically ghost-proofing your house with dairy flames, kind of like the Tibetan version of leaving the porch light on to scare raccoons. Historians still argue whether the lamp lighting began purely as a Buddhist practice or if it drew from older fire-based rituals of the Bon religion. Was it always about wisdom and enlightenment, or was it first about keeping the night safely lit in a world before street lamps? The debate flickers on, much like the butter flames themselves. You stop at a corner where pilgrims have gathered. They kneel to light fresh lamps, hands trembling as they shield wicks from the breeze. The flames catch wobble, then stand tall, glowing against the dark. Children carry smaller lamps, their cheeks flushed pink from the cold. Families place lamps together, lining walls and steps until the whole alley shines like a river of gold. Joke number 1, it looks less like a solemn ritual and more like the city's attempting to win some ancient holiday version of who has the most Christmas lights, but instead of electricity, it's all butter and devotion. You keep walking. The stones beneath your feet shine slick with melted fat, making each step a cautious shuffle. The crowd presses close, everyone moving slowly, reverently, as if the lamps themselves have set the pace. The monks chant again, their voices bouncing off stone walls, weaving with the flicker of flames. A hush spreads when a group of sculpted butter animals, half collapsed from earlier, are carried out into the street. Lanterns are placed around them, and suddenly their puddled forms glow as if reborn. You marvel at this second life. The sculptures couldn't survive the sun, but they thrive in candlelight. You pause to watch a row of butter lamps gutter in the breeze, the flames bowing low before flaring upright again. There's a strange intimacy in watching them struggle and survive. You feel like you're witnessing not just fire, but breath. And the jokes don't stop. A pilgrim near you nudges his neighbor, pointing to a lamp dripping heavily. "Looks like it's crying," he says, and they both laugh quietly. Joke number 2, maybe it's the butter lamp weeping because it knows it'll end up in someone's tea tomorrow. The longer you wander, the more the light consumes everything. Rooftops glow, courtyards shimmer, statues inside temples blaze in flickering halos. It's no longer possible to see the city as stone and wood. It feels like the entire place has become fluid, soft glowing alive. Historians debate whether the festival's lighting displays were meant mainly for local worshippers, or if they doubled as a form of soft power, a way for monasteries to showcase wealth and attract prestige. Was it faith politics or a blend of both? Once again, the line blurs, just as the flames blur shadows into light. At one point, you stop to rest at the base of a wall. From there, the alley ahead looks like a stream of molten gold flowing uphill. Butter lamps perched along the walls resemble stars that came down to live among people. Your breath fogs as you exhale, and for a moment it feels like your own breath is joining the smoke rising toward the sky. Families linger, faces glowing in lamplight, their silhouettes flickering as they lean in close. A young boy whispers to his grandmother, asking if the lamps keep the gods awake at night. She chuckles, then answers softly, "No, little one." The lamps keep us awake, so we remember them. That answer settles in your mind heavier than the butter's smell. Maybe the lamps don't just light streets, they light memory. And in a world where everything melts by sunrise, memory is the only permanence anyone can hope for. The wind carries the chanting deeper into the alleys, and you rise to keep walking. The city has turned into a constellation under your feet, and though your steps are slow, you don't want to stop. By the time you reach the central square, the air has shifted again. The chanting is softer now, almost like a lullaby, and you realize why morning is coming. A pale glow brushes the horizon, faint but steady, and the butter sculptures you admired all night are standing on borrowed time. You take a slow breath. The night's chill still lingers, but the warmth of dawn presses forward with quiet persistence. The first rays creep over rooftops, striking the edges of the courtyard, where monks and villagers wait in hushed anticipation. Everyone knows what's about to happen. Here's your grounded historical fact: the butter sculpture displays were deliberately timed for winter nights when the cold air preserved them just long enough for a single evening spectacle. As soon as the sun rose, they were destined to collapse. The transience was the point. It embodied the Buddhist teaching of impermanence. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some pilgrims believed that if a sculpture lasted longer than expected into the morning, it was a sign of cosmic favor. Others joked that the monks had cheated by chilling their butter a little too well. Ancient art drama accusations of freezer doping. Historians still argue whether audiences truly embraced the collapse as a spiritual teaching, or whether they just tolerated it as inevitable. Were pilgrims comforted by impermanence, or disappointed that the beauty never lasted? The debate lingers like a fading flame. You watch the sun creep higher, and with it the sculptures begin to sweat. Tiny droplets bead on the dragon's forehead. The lion's mane glistens with greasy tears. Birds sag wings, sliding slowly downward as though reluctant to admit defeat. The crowd reacts in silence, broken only by the occasional sigh. Children clutch parents' hands, torn between fascination and sadness. Adults bow their heads. Some chant softly, others whisper prayers. You can feel the tension. It's not just art melting, it's devotion dissolving before everyone's eyes. Then, like a signal, one sculpture gives way completely. A yak's horn drops with a quiet splat, scattering bits of pigment across the ground. A ripple of murmurs passes through the crowd, but no one steps forward to interfere. The rule is simple: once the sun takes them, the gods return to formlessness. Joke number 1: if this were modern times, someone would definitely try to stick the whole thing in a walk-in freezer just to preserve Tibetan heritage. But here, No such rescue comes. The butter belongs to time. As the light grows stronger, the sculptures cascade into collapse. A lotus petal crumbles. A guardian's hand slides down his own chest like he's waving farewell. The dragon's jaw droops open in an eternal yawn. Soon only half figures remain, shapes too vague to honor, yet too beautiful to forget. You notice how the crowd reacts differently. Some pilgrims laugh softly as though reminded of life's absurdity. Others weep openly, their tears matching the butters. Still others stand perfectly still, faces serene. Everyone processes the collapse in their own way, but no one leaves. They stay until the last stay. The sun rises higher, golden and pitiless. The air warms, sculptures buckle. Butter drips down plinths like candle wax, pooling in shallow puddles. The courtyard now looks like a battlefield of Greece heroes and gods fallen into anonymity. Historians debate whether the deliberate destruction of such effort was meant to sharpen faith or to humble the artisans themselves. Did monks feel sadness as their week's work melted, or did they feel pride in embodying impermanence so perfectly you can almost hear the argument echoing in scholarly halls centuries later? Joke number 2. Standing there, you can't help but think of those sandcastles you made as a kid. You spent hours shaping towers and moats only for the tide or your bratty cousin to wash them away. Congratulations, you were basically practicing Tibetan butter sculpture philosophy on the beach. The final collapse is quiet. A great deity, half slumped for the past half hour, suddenly gives in. Its torso slides forward, arms folding in on itself, face merging into the puddle below. The crowd exhales collectively, as though a chapter has closed.
And just like that, it's over.
No one claps, no one cheers. The silence is its own applause. You realize that in this ritual, the ending is the true performance. Watching beauty become ruin is the act of devotion. The monks move forward at last. They begin clearing the remains, scooping melted butter into buckets. Some of it will be repurposed as fuel for lamps, carrying the memory of the sculptures into light once more. Nothing is wasted, not even ruin. The pilgrims begin to disperse, slowly at first, then with steady steps. You join them, carrying with you not an image of perfection, but the ghost of what once stood. Somehow it feels heavier, more meaningful than the sculptures themselves. You trail the pilgrims through the winding alleys, still slick with puddles of melted butter. The lamps flicker faintly in the daylight, no longer brilliant, just quiet reminders of the night's brilliance. People murmur as they walk, sharing impressions of what they saw, and you realize this conversation, the retelling, is part of the ritual too. Here's your grounded historical fact: the Great Prayer Festival, or Monlam Chenmo, where the butter sculptures featured most prominently, began in the 15th century under Tsongkhapa, the founder of the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism. It became one of the most important annual gatherings in Lhasa, blending public devotion, monastic ceremony, and communal art. And your quirky tidbit: some records claim that during particularly lavish festivals, whole streets were transformed into glowing galleries lined not just with lamps and sculptures, but with temporary butter murals, massive wall-sized scenes painted in fat. Imagine strolling through downtown and realizing the billboards are all edible. Historians still argue whether these traditions unified Tibet under a shared cultural identity, or if they mostly served as platforms for monasteries to assert dominance. Was it spiritual glue binding society, or a subtle chess game of influence? The debate persists, fueled by every fragment of testimony left behind. You notice how, as pilgrims return home, they carry the memory like a treasure. A man tells his neighbor that the lion was more majestic this year. A woman insists the dragon's colors were unmatched. Children debate whether the yak or the Garuda would have won in a fight. Memory reshapes what melted, granting the sculptures a second life in words. It hits you. Then the real endurance of butter sculpture wasn't in the art itself, but in the annual cycle. Every year people came, saw and lost. Every year they talked, remembered and retold. The art wasn't permanent, but the tradition was. You sit down near a step where two old women are gossiping. They lean close, comparing this year's festival to the ones of their youth. One laughs, recalling how once a sculpture melted before the night was even halfway through. The other shakes her head, insisting that the best one she ever saw was decades ago, a towering snow lion whose mane looked like it was on fire. Joke number one: apparently everyone becomes an Olympic judge when it comes to melted butter. As the day brightens, you notice the city doesn't mourn. Instead, it shifts into a kind of calm satisfaction. Stalls reopen. Merchants sweep greasy puddles from their doorways. Children run down alleys imitating the sculptures they saw, their arms flapping like bird wings. Life resumes richer for having paused to witness impermanence together. The monks return to their routines too. Some head into prayer halls, others collect butter scraps for lamps. Their faces show no sadness. If anything, there's a quiet pride. For them, the success wasn't in the sculpture's survival, but in their disappearance. The faster the sun erased them, the sharper the lessons struck home. Historians debate whether this acceptance of impermanence was universally felt, or whether ordinary townsfolk privately wished the sculptures would last longer. Was everyone equally philosophical, or did some secretly resent the fleetingness? No answer. Survives only the stories of devotion repeated each year. You recall last night's glow, the alleys turned into rivers of gold, the sculptures shimmering like frozen gods, and contrast it with this quiet morning. The memory already feels dreamlike. It strikes you that this is exactly how the festival survives. Not in butter, but in you, in every pilgrim, every traveler, every monk. The art melts, but the imprint endures. Joke number two: it's like the ultimate limited edition collectible. You had to be there, no replays, no take-backs. Miss it, and you're stuck listening to your neighbor brag. You should have seen last year's dragon. As you follow the flow of pilgrims back toward the heart of the city, you realize you're walking through centuries of repetition. The same cycle happened 100 years ago and 100 before that. The same collapse, the same memories, the same retellings. You're not just a witness tonight, you're another link in a chain that keeps stretching forward. And isn't that the irony? The art melts, but the tradition never does. The butter vanishes, but the culture hardens year after year. Impermanence, it seems, is the surest way to permanence. By midday, the streets are quieter, though the echoes of last night linger. Merchants polish brass pots in the sunlight, children nap on doorsteps, and pilgrims begin the long trek back to their villages. You, however, drift toward a group of foreigners, thin, sunburned men in worn coats, notebooks in hand, eyes wide with that particular blend of awe and judgment. They're here to record what they've seen, and you can almost hear their thoughts spilling into paper. Here's your grounded historical fact from the 18th and 19th centuries. Onward European and Chinese travelers, missionaries and traders occasionally documented the butter sculpture festivals. Many described them with fascination, though often through skeptical or dismissive eyes, calling them wasteful or bizarre. And your quirky tidbit: one British traveller once noted that Tibetans seemed dangerously obsessed with butter, claiming half the city smelled of it during festival season. He wasn't wrong about the smell, but his tone carried that colonial bewilderment, as though using butter for art was some cosmic miscalculation. Joke number one: little did he know future generations would do the same thing with bacon at state fairs. Historians still argue whether these outside accounts preserved valuable detail about rituals otherwise forgotten, or whether they distorted the truth through exoticism and prejudice. Did they capture culture or caricature it? The debate still divides scholars, flipping through yellowed pages. You lean in, eavesdropping on one traveller dictating notes to a companion. "A colossal waste," he mutters. All that food turned to grease puddles by sunrise. His assistant nods, scribbling furiously. Neither seems to notice the pilgrims who had just bowed in reverence hours before. It strikes you how much perspective matters. To the monks, the butter wasn't food lost, it was an offering transformed. To the foreigners, it was extravagance in a land where resources seemed scarce. You smirk at the mismatch, realizing that both views say more about the observers than the butter itself. The travelers glance around nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the chanting still humming from distant halls. One fumbles with a sketch trying to capture the melted remains of a dragon. The drawing looks pitiful, more like a sick cow than a mythical beast. Joke number 2, you imagine him showing it back home, bragging, "This is the terrifying Tibetan dragon," while everyone else politely nods, wondering why it looks like dairy roadkill. Still, you can't entirely dismiss them. Without these dusty accounts, much of what you've just witnessed might be lost. The butter sculptures were never meant to last, and in their own way, the foreigner's notes became the freezer the butter never had. Imperfect, biased, sometimes laughably clueless, but still a trace. You follow them as they debate whether to write about the unsanitary smoke from thousands of lamps. One insists it proves Tibetans lacked refinement, while another counters that it looked magnificent. They argue, their voices rising until a nearby monk glances their way. The foreigners fall silent instantly, sheepish under the monk's calm gaze. Historians debate whether Tibet's opening to foreign eyes enriched its legacy or diluted it. Was it better for these traditions to remain local and untouched, or for them to be recorded, however clumsily, for the wider world? As you listen to the scratch of quills and mutters of complaint, you feel the weight of that question. The sun climbs higher, the smell of butter fading slowly from the streets. For the travellers, this will become just another strange tale to tell back home. For the pilgrims, it remains the heartbeat of their year. For you, it's both intimate and alien, absurd and sacred. One foreigner pockets a lump of hardened butter as a souvenir, wincing at the grease on his fingers. He mutters something about showing it to a museum. You grin quietly, imagining the future curator's face when told, "Yes, this greasy blob is a sacred artifact." Joke number 3, imagine the exhibit label, 18th century dairy, do not lick. You leave them behind, realizing that foreign eyes will always see differently. Yet somehow their clumsy notes and awkward sketches ensure that even if the butter melts, the story doesn't. The next day, as the city settles back into routine, you begin to notice something else, how politics threads its way through every greasy puddle. Butter might seem like humble food turned into fleeting sculpture, but in Tibet, nothing this grand ever floated above power. Here's your grounded historical fact: the Great Prayer Festival wasn't just a religious spectacle, it was also a stage for authority. The Dalai Lama's presence, or his representatives, lent the event weight. Monasteries competed not only in artistry but in prestige, and rulers occasionally used the grandeur of their butter displays as subtle propaganda. Now for your quirky tidbit, in some years, certain sculptures depicted not just gods or mythical creatures, but entire battle scenes, frozen in butter soldiers, horses' banners, all meant to remind the public of victories or to suggest divine favor for particular leaders. Imagine your political campaign ad, but carved in margarine. Historians still argue whether these displays genuinely inspired loyalty to the state or whether they sowed rivalries between monasteries hungry for influence. Was butter art a unifier or a wedge? The debates trickle down through dusty archives like melted fat into stone cracks. You picture a powerful noble standing before the sculptures, gesturing grandly. "See how magnificent this year's lion is, proof of our virtue and strength." Pilgrims might nod reverently, but you can't help smirking at the idea of politics running on dairy. Joke number 1, somewhere out there. A monk probably muttered, "Who knew? Butter could be weaponized." In the courtyard, you overhear whispers about how one monastery's display seemed deliberately more elaborate than another's. "Did you see Gandon's dragon?" a man asks, eyes wide, bigger than Sarah's by far. The woman beside him chuckles knowingly, as though aware this wasn't just art, it was a silent boast, a contest of status. The more you think about it, the more butter seems like a metaphor for power itself. Easy to mold, dazzling under the right light, but always at risk of collapse when the sun rises. Joke number 2, the perfect campaign slogan. "Vote for me before I melt." Inside the temple, monks continue chanting. But even here, you sense the weight of hierarchy. Higher-ranking lamas receive more prominent roles in the festival. Their blessings carried further, their reputations burnished by the artistry surrounding them. For the people, devotion and politics blend so smoothly it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. Historians debate whether the people themselves cared about this layer of meaning. Did villagers come for politics or just for awe and devotion? Perhaps both. After all, admiration is admiration whether for gods, for art, or for leaders. The festival also served as a reminder of unity in times of tension. Gatherings of thousands meant visible evidence of collective faith, a reassurance to rulers that their people were aligned. And yet the very act of competition between monasteries hinted at rivalries always simmering beneath the surface. The sculptures melted in hours, but the politics behind them lingered like smoke on stone walls. You imagine a monk, weary after a week of sculpting, muttering as his figure collapses at dawn. At least the abbot will be pleased. Devotion and duty blur art, and politics fold together. Even impermanence, it seems, could be drafted into service. Joke number 3 picture? A modern press release breaking news. Opposition party unveils largest butter yak in history. Government expected to respond with triple-headed dragon. Politics hasn't changed much, really. It's still about spectacle, only the mediums differ. As you leave the courtyard, the melted remnants swept away, you glance back at the empty platforms. They look barren now, but you can almost hear the echoes of power whispered in the cracks. Butter gods as pawns, sculptures as sermons, artistry as authority. You drift along the temple walls, thoughts heavy with melted deities and whispered politics. And then, almost naturally, your mind circles back to the lesson monks intended all along: the science of impermanence. The butter was never meant to endure. Its collapse wasn't a tragedy, it was the curriculum. Here's your grounded historical fact in Buddhist philosophy: impermanence, anicca, is one of the 3 marks of existence alongside suffering and non-self. The butter sculptures embodied this principle in literal form: lavish, breathtaking, gone by dawn. Their destruction was not a flaw in the ritual, but its perfection. Now for your quirky tidbit: some monasteries apparently experimented with unusual additives, ashes, herbs, even powdered bone, to slow melting or create different textures. Imagine a monk boasting, "Our dragon lasted 2 hours longer because we used Grandma's secret recipe." Joke number 1, somewhere out there, a cookbook for 100 ways to improve. Your butter Buddha is waiting to be rediscovered. Historians still argue whether the public truly absorbed these deep philosophical lessons or whether most simply enjoyed the show. Did pilgrims walk away pondering impermanence, or just comparing which lion looked coolest? The debate is unresolved, much like the question of whether art can ever fully control how it's received. You sit by a gutter where butter still clings in streaks, hardened overnight into pale lines. The sun makes them glisten faintly like scars of last night's brilliance. It strikes you that impermanence isn't just about disappearance. It's also about residue. Nothing vanishes without a trace, not even butter. A monk passes and nods at you, perhaps sensing your wandering thoughts. He pauses, then gestures toward the hardened streaks. "All things leave memory," he says softly. "Even when they go?" His voice carries like a bell, simple and profound. You think of how modern science talks about entropy, everything tending toward disorder, energy slipping away. And yet here in this courtyard, entropy feels oddly gentle. Not destruction, but transformation. The sculptures didn't die, they became light for lamps, memory for pilgrims, grease for the streets. Joke number 2, you can't help but imagine a physics professor lecturing. Today we'll study the second law of thermodynamics, or as Tibetans call it, Tuesday morning after the butter festival. Children wander by, chasing each other, their laughter bouncing off the temple walls. One slips and nearly falls in a greasy patch, saved by a quick tug from a sibling. They shriek, then collapse into giggles. Impermanence, it seems, is easier to accept when you're 6. Historians debate whether these rituals shaped Tibetan psychology, training entire communities to live with loss more gracefully than other cultures. Or was it simply one ritual among many, no more transformative than a seasonal fair? The truth hides in lives long gone, but standing here you suspect the monks knew exactly what they were doing. The smell of butter is faint now, mixed with dust and incense. You close your eyes and imagine last night's glow, The sculptures radiant in darkness, the crowd hushed in reverence. Then you imagine them melting, puddling, vanishing. Both images feel equally beautiful. Perhaps that's the trick to love the arising and the dissolving with equal devotion. Joke number 3, it makes you wonder what would happen if modern society tried this. A city builds a butter skyscraper downtown marvels for one night, then watches it collapse at dawn. People would riot, or maybe, just maybe, they'd finally understand what monks have been teaching for centuries. You rise to your feet, brushing dust from your robe, and take a slow step forward. The butter is gone, but its lesson trails you like a shadow. Nothing lasts, but everything matters while it does. By late afternoon, you wander beyond the bustling courtyards and into quieter alleys. Here, the echoes of the festival feel thinner, like smoke dissipating into the sky. A few scattered butter streaks still cling to stone walls, faint traces of what once roared with color and shape. It's in this silence that you realize much of the practice itself has already melted into history. Here's your grounded historical fact. After Tibet's mid-20th century upheavals, many large butter sculpture festivals dwindled or vanished altogether. Political pressures, resource scarcity, and the disruption of monastic life made such lavish displays increasingly rare. Some monasteries continued in smaller, hidden forms, but the golden age of grand butter festivals slowly slipped away. And your quirky tidbit in exile communities? Tibetan monks sometimes recreated the tradition using margarine instead of yak butter, since yak herds weren't exactly roaming Swiss pastures or Indian plains. Imagine monks holding up their creations and sighing, "It's not the same, but at least it doesn't melt as fast." Historians still argue whether this decline represents a permanent loss or just another transformation. Did butter sculptures belong to a particular moment in history, never meant to survive outside Tibet's unique climate and society? Or will they continue adapting, maybe even reappearing one day in unexpected places? As you walk, you spot a small courtyard where a handful of monks are quietly sculpting. There's no crowd, no chanting festival, just 3 figures bent over lumps of butter shaping flowers with careful fingers. The sculptures are tiny, no taller than your hand, but the devotion in their movements feels just as grand as last night's towering lions. You kneel to watch, breath held, aware that you're witnessing something fragile, perhaps endangered. Joke number 1, you imagine a modern headline, "Ancient Tibetan butter sculpture survives now," sponsored by Dairy Queen. The absurdity makes you chuckle softly, though you keep the thought to yourself. The younger monk glances up and gives you a small smile. "We make them every year," he says quietly, "even if only for ourselves." His words carry a weight, as if keeping the ritual alive in miniature is an act of resistance, a whisper of continuity in a world that sometimes prefers forgetting. And indeed, forgetting is the greatest enemy. Butter sculptures are ephemeral by design, but the tradition survives only if memory refuses to melt as quickly. That's why stories like the ones pilgrims told on their way home matter as much as the art itself. Historians debate whether the ritual was ever truly forgotten, or whether it merely slipped underground waiting to be rediscovered. Some argue that even in the darkest years, monks crafted tiny butter figures in hidden chambers. Others think such claims are nostalgic embellishments. Either way, the idea that someone somewhere kept shaping butter feels comforting. Joke number 2, you picture a monk sneaking into a freezer late at night, whispering, "Shh, no one must know." The butter gods live on. The courtyard quiets as the monks finish their miniature sculptures. They light a single lamp beside them, the flame flickering gently against the soft forms. For a moment you feel as though time itself has paused, one small island of tradition floating in a vast ocean of change. When you rise to leave, you carry the image of those tiny sculptures with you almost more vividly than the grand ones. It's easy to marvel at massive dragons and towering deities, but it's the small, almost secret offerings that remind you the practice isn't gone. It has simply shifted, shrunk, hidden, maybe even waiting. Joke number 3, after all, butter has always been slippery. Why shouldn't its traditions be the same, sliding out of sight but never completely out of reach? As evening falls again, you sense that the forgotten isn't truly forgotten. It lingers disguised in memory, waiting for warmth to sculpt it back into being. Night has come again, though softer this time, the sky a velvet blanket stretched across the mountains. You ease into the quiet, your steps slower now as though the city itself has entered a gentle exhale. And in this calm your mind drifts into dreams of sculptures that never melt. Here's your grounded historical fact. Some Tibetan texts describe visionary realms where deities reside eternally, untouched by decay. To devotees, butter sculptures were earthly imitations of those realms, a fleeting glimpse of permanence through impermanence. And your quirky tidbit travelers once joked that Tibet was the only place where gods could be eaten with toast, since after festivals the leftover butter was sometimes repurposed for lamps or in lean years even cooking. Imagine stirring a stew and realizing your ladle once carved Avalokiteshvara's eyebrow. Historians still argue whether these dream realms were seen as literal heavens or simply teaching tools, ways of framing life as a cycle of appearance and disappearance. The uncertainty itself feels dreamlike, as if the truth is always a little out of reach. You picture yourself lying back against a temple wall, eyelids heavy. In your imagination, the sculptures from nights before rise again, dragons curling flowers, blooming deities smiling. But this time they don't sag or collapse. The night remains cool, the dawn never comes, and the butter gods linger. Their colors glow endlessly, frozen in a dream that feels more real than waking. Joke number one, you realize that in this version of eternity, monks are spared from endless butter churning. Even paradise has its perks. The air feels syrupy, slow. Your breathing deepens as though the city itself has decided you've earned some rest. Maybe you think that was always the point. Not just to marvel at impermanence, but to find peace in knowing that imagination can hold what reality lets go. Joke number two, perhaps the butter gods live rent-free in your brain, now taking up the space you once reserved for useless trivia like the capital of Burkina Faso. Pilgrims settle in nearby inns, their chatter fading into murmurs. The monks retreat behind heavy doors. You're left alone with your thoughts, and they soften like butter at room temperature. A gentle stillness spreads through your chest. Historians debate whether we'll ever see butter sculpture festivals return at their old scale. Maybe they'll reappear as tourist shows, maybe as quiet revivals, maybe never. But in your drifting state, it doesn't matter. Here in your half-dream, they already live forever. Joke number three, you muse that if heaven exists, its entrance is probably guarded not by pearly gates, but by a giant butter yak nodding in approval. And with that, the dream thickens into silence. You allow it to hold you warm, safe, endless. And now, as the last echoes of butter gods fade, let yourself rest fully. The night stretches long and gentle around you, and the city's noise has gone quiet, as though even the stones of the old monasteries are breathing slower. You've followed a trail through rituals, colors, chants, and puddles of melted art, and somewhere along the way you picked up a truth that impermanence can be comforting, not frightening. Close your eyes and imagine the cool air of the high plateau brushing across your skin. The mountains loom in the distance, not as threats, but as guardians, their snowy peaks shimmering faintly in moonlight. Somewhere inside a monastery, a lamp still burns its flame, trembling but steady, a reminder that even the smallest light is enough. Let the sculptures you've seen, dragons, deities, flowers, dissolve softly in your thoughts, not as losses, but as dissolving clouds. They've served their purpose, and now they melt into calm. Your breathing falls into rhythm with the imagined chants you heard, steady, low, grounding you in the present. And in this gentle rhythm, your body sinks deeper into rest. Muscles unclench, thoughts soften. The day's edges blur until only this stillness remains. You don't need to hold on to any of it, the butter gods, the debates, the laughter, because the memory itself will hold you quietly like the warm light of a lamp. So drift easy and slow into the kind of sleep where dawn takes its time, where nothing rushes, where everything you've carried gently melts away.